Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Brown Girls Sound Off, BGSO, where we center and amplify the voices of women of color. I am Tony Woodland, and I am excited to have my sisters with me as always. Miss Nafisa Carter, hey sis, and Chantal Randolph. Oh my God, hey. Beautiful. We are missing one of our sisters this week. Edwina could not join us this week, but I know she is going to be watching. First of all, can I believe it is March 17th and that we are already halfway through the month of March? It is crazy, right? But anyway, we wanted to first of all acknowledge that maybe some of you might have been looking forward to an episode last week. And so we've updated some things, just to be responsive. If you follow BGSO, we're always talking about self-care and doing what we need to do for ourselves. And one thing that we recognized was the need for us to give ourselves more time, to just kind of, be present for ourselves, for our families. And so we have moved to a new podcast schedule, which is the first and third Thursdays of the month, right? So 2 Thursdays a month, we will come to you with a podcast, and we are also, it's going to free us up actually to plan some other amazing things for you all, especially if you are in the Facebook group. So if you're not already in the Facebook group and you identify as a woman of color, then please check us out. Again, Brown Girls Sound Off, BGSO, just like the podcast. So let's go ahead and get into it. So I'm really excited about, this episode, but honestly, sis, before we get into this conversation, something came up for me today. And I don't know if it's been on all of your mind, but, in BGSO, especially for those of you who have been with us for a while, we just celebrated, this is, made a year. We don't tend to really talk politics specifically, yet everything is political. But I say that because, something that's really been on my mind has been the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I know we're not going to, that's not our topic, but something that I read today was an article where, the president of Ukraine was basically pleading, with the rest of the world, specifically the United States, to do something, to do more. And so I don't know, it's kind of scary. Do you all follow this coverage? Because I've been freaked out. And so I've kind of stayed away from it. What do you think, Nafisa?
I try not to watch the news that much, honestly. With those types of things, even like when the pandemic was going on, it's just a whole lot of like scare tactics with a lot of things too. And it's just enough going on in the world already. And I just choose, I'm just like, well, look, at the end of the day, God's in charge. So that just gives me peace. But it's definitely, unnerving for sure. But yeah, that's what I go to recenter myself and just don't even give it any more energy.
Yeah. Chantal, have you been following any of the coverage?
You're mute. Kind of in the same thing as Nafisa, where I've been kind of stepping back. I really don't watch a lot of TV in the first place. But I do try to stay abreast of what's happening in our community and the world. And one of the things that I will say is I appreciate at minimum, if anything, the humanitarian efforts of not just, us as the United States, but everyone around the world. You know what I'm saying? I actually watched a shot where there were Ukrainian refugees going to a new school, I believe in Poland, and how they welcomed the young people into the new school. And I thought that was really, really, really sweet. And I've been reading reports on how people are allowing refugees to come in and move in with them. Like they don't know these people from Adam, and they're opening up their homes and allowing them to move in. And I just thought, wow, in the midst of in this catastrophe that I am my brother's keeper or my sister's keeper, and opening their homes and allowing people they don't even know to come and live with them, And so I always try to find the bright light or the bright spot in all of this craziness that's happening in our world. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I know your video was cutting out for a minute there, but we got the gist of your message. And the only other thing, and again, just for you all watching, we did not plan to talk about this, but this, I mean, it's hard to, I'm like Nafisa, like I try to honestly just stay underneath of a rock because it can be quite scary, unnerving, and anxiety inducing. A couple things came to mind, and I think probably is the reason why it came up for me, and I wanted to just briefly acknowledge this on our podcast. Was the first thing was resistance. And yes, as messed up, inhumane, and all of the other words that we can use as the invasion is, it is all of those things and more. Is a total atrocity. And what, reading some of the coverage from like the Ukrainian perspective, in addition to the hurt, pain, trauma, and all that, just the sheer resistance is something that I think, also needs to be told, just to kind of make that connection between when you think about what happened with our ancestors, right? And so when only one story is told about how this happened to us, and we, and those things did happen. And I just think it's important for us to acknowledge that these people over there are not laying down and taking this. Like, they are taking up arms and fighting for their country and fighting for their right to live. And that is to be honored, acknowledged, and recognized. And so I just wanted to name that. And the connection that I was thinking about was, what does colonialism and nationalism have to do with all this? Much deeper conversation, but I did want to just kind of bring it to this platform because I saw some parallels in this story and in some of our stories as well. And, and it's going on, and I'm praying for peace for sure. So with that being said, our main topic tonight is about imposter syndrome, right? And so I know that many of us have heard about imposter syndrome. Maybe we feel that we've experienced imposter syndrome, but I wanted to talk about it. I know that it's still Women's History Month. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about it is because, we take the month of March to celebrate women and the accomplishments that women have made. And in my mind, honestly, I can't help but always reflect inward. And I look at me and I look at my circle and I think about all the amazing things that we've also accomplished. And then yet and still, like, those feelings of doubt and all that, kind of creep up from time to time. So I sent you all, an article and a video, and one of them, which I've seen, kind of circulating around social media, one of them was basically saying, like, we might want to rethink, telling women, especially Black and Brown women, that we, are suffering from imposter syndrome, right? And so we're going to get into that part in a moment. But the first question that I have for you ladies that I'd like to know is, like, maybe when was the first time you heard about imposter syndrome? Or the first time you felt that you experienced it? So I just, I wanted to kind of start there, and then we'll move into the other part of the conversation. But, and maybe while you're thinking, I'll quickly share that my first time, I remember it vividly. I had heard about imposter syndrome, but I was actually preparing to speak. And this was a few years ago. I was asked to speak. I was preparing to speak. I'm just kind of sitting there waiting, till it's time for me to go set up in my room and everything. And I will never forget, like, looking around this auditorium, and I was like, I'm about to go and speak. Why would I speak? Why did they ask me? I shouldn't be here. I had this full on, like, panic attack, like, to where I think I might have even mentioned this on a previous episode, where I started thinking of excuses. Well, let's call them what they are. I started thinking of lies that I was going to tell to get myself out of it. I was like, well, what if I just say that I'm sick? You know what I mean? They'll just cancel my session, and they can either have a free period or go to another session. But I vividly remember that moment. I'll kind of unpack that a little bit later in the conversation, but that was a moment for me a few years ago, and I almost ran out of there. How about you ladies? Like, when did you first either hear about imposter syndrome and or, experience it?
It's a term I just recently starting really to hear about, honestly, but probably within the last year or so. I'm hearing it come up a lot more. My sister actually just mentioned it. She just had an interview and she literally was just talking about it earlier. But I think of a recent time where I experienced it was last school year. So I was in the first time in a role of being like a class advisor. And just a couple things. It was like it was a big thing, but it was my first time. It was an honest mistake. And I think I like forgot it was a miscommunications and like the senior shirts didn't get like ordered. And I was talking like to my principal, like towards the end of it. And, you know, she knows I'm an aspiring assistant principal and things like that. And she had made a comment because I guess she was like upset about the shirts. And I was like, you know, like, I want to rectify this. Like, I was a miscommunication. And she's like, yeah, like, I'm really upset. And she was like, you know, and then she was like, you know, I need to see you doing like, you know, a lot more. I know you want to be in a lot more like in a leadership role and like, you know, with you being like an aspiring leader. And it just had me like questioning myself. And I was like, hold up. I was like, wait a minute. And I was just like, dang, like, you know, feeling like I wasn't qualified. Like, am I qualified to do this? You know, if a position comes up, will I be ready? Like, maybe I really haven't had enough experience. Like, I started thinking about like, what have I done? I was like, wait a minute. Like, I've been teaching for 18 years. I've been a leader in the building for, you know, 6 years at that point. And I had to, you know, went back to her. I said, you know, respectfully, like, I really rubbed me the wrong way. I was like, this is you. We haven't even been in a school for a year. Like, you came into school in the middle of a pandemic. There's plenty of things that I've done, you know, in my tenure of teaching as well as before you got here. Then I brought up, furthermore, I specifically asked to spearhead equity work in the school. I asked to bring in a specialist, one of my very dearest friends, my sister, Dr. Tony Woodland, which you turned down. So there's, you know, and I would say you chose to give that position to another person, but I've come to you with several different projects and things that I've wanted to lead just in this short period of time that you've been here, and you haven't afforded me that opportunity. And I also put it in writing. So, you know, you have to, and I was questioning myself, and it happens a lot, you know, this is different little like microaggressions that occur. And I was really starting to doubt myself, like, am I ready? Do I have an experience? I was like, wait a minute, you know, I had to put my crown back on.
Girl, you had to fix that thing. Oh, okay. Because it was on, it might have been a little crooked.
A little crooked is this. I had to straighten it. You're right. I had to straighten it out.
Straighten it out. Okay. Chantal, when was the first time maybe you heard about the term or experienced it?
Oh my gosh, I think like Nafisa recently, maybe within the last year or two. And, you know, a lot of this, I would probably say I experienced in my career in the nonprofit world, and being African-American in the nonprofit world, and being a female in the nonprofit world. I experienced it a lot. I just didn't know what to name it, right? Like, I'd be in conferences and I'd be at events, and, you know, I would be the one leading the presentations, and people would give me this look or say something, you know, out of the way to me. And I'm like, well, I have just as much experience as everyone else. Like, am I missing something? Is something wrong? You know, and I would constantly feel like that anxiety come up, like, you know, well, am I qualified to be here? Should I speak? Should I say something? And I realized like I would always feel like I had to go above and beyond to prove myself, right? But I didn't know that that was imposter syndrome, right? So I recently again, probably in the last year or so, is when I really went back and started reflecting like, oh, that was imposter syndrome, that feeling of not feeling like you're enough or you're inadequate, or you had to constantly go above and beyond and prove yourself, questioning your abilities, your capabilities. Yeah, I've experienced all of that.
Oh my gosh. Oh my, it just, whew. You know, just hearing both of you, it's, and thinking about just how much we have these shared experiences sometimes is overwhelming. And so, you know, first of all, thank you both for sharing that, because I know for me, you know, even reliving that moment, it just brings up, you know, a little bit of anxiety and negative feelings about it, to be honest with you. Now, something that Nafisa started talking about made me think of, you know, something else that that's coming up quite a bit. And I kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but that article was saying we might wish to rethink, telling women, again, especially Black and brown women, that we have imposter syndrome. So when Afisa was sharing her story, you were talking about, the fact that you thought about, these little microaggressions, like all this stuff has you self, doubting. And so that's what that article was basically saying, like, to position this experience as imposter syndrome. And I don't think that the author was advocating for like the total removal of it, but I do like the framing around it is when we just call it imposter syndrome, it puts the onus on like the person experiencing it, like, yeah, you have this thing, right? You have this condition, rather than, no, these conditions are jacked up that I'm working in. You know what I mean? Or really, this culture is not inclusive, it is not equitable. It doesn't make me feel like I belong. And so that's not a syndrome that I'm going to carry. Maybe it's a syndrome around here, and something needs to be done so that, so that I can thrive and grow and feel whole and feel confident. So I just wanted to know your thoughts about that. And, again, like I said, I believe the article was not, advocating for the removal of that from our, vocabulary. But I do think back to experiences maybe that I'm thinking back to one particular experience that I had when honestly I was experiencing a lot of racism, a lot of sexism, a lot of ageism, a lot of things. And they were all in one. They were like intersecting. All these experiences were just overlapping and impacting me all at once. And I had someone say, well, yeah, this is a tough job. And I'm like, miss, I could do this job with my eyes closed, like don't make it seem like it's a tough job. So I'm having a tough time doing a tough job. No, this is a tough culture. You all were not prepared to receive me. You were not receptive. You were not welcoming. Again, honestly, a lot of racist stuff is going on, like, let's just call it what it is. You're making me feel like my ideas are unwelcome, that I'm unwelcome, that my contributions are unwelcome, my assistance, my partnership. And so those are the things that I think sometimes when we just focus on imposter syndrome, then we take the focus off of the real work that needs to be done, because the work that needs to be done, yeah, we can always do work within ourselves, but the real work that needs to be done is beyond us. But I just wanted to know what you all thought about this whole idea that maybe want to rethink, imposter syndrome.
I think it's a good point. It's an interesting point, because I do feel like it does almost, instead of looking at the outside factors that are contributing to you feeling, invalidated, feeling unworthy, feeling unwelcome, you start to look at yourself. So I feel like that the whole way you framed it, that is what you do, because that's what I did. When you think about imposter syndrome, it's like, okay, you're doing the impostering. Mm-hmm. Instead of looking at what is causing you to feel this way and to react this way and to have this self-doubt. So I do like that. Like I agree that sometimes it does occur, but I think maybe wording it differently or looking at it in a different way and not using it as loosely and generalizing it as much. I think it's a good idea to really look at what's actually causing it. Like, let's look at the culture of this schoolhouse. For me, I work in a school building. Mm-hmm. Why am I feeling this way? Because there aren't equitable practices. I'm not being afforded the same opportunities. Things have changed a lot because I've been a lot more vocal, but in that moment, that's what was occurring. And I feel like a lot of times when you put certain labels on things, mm-hmm. I feel like it almost gives the person causing you to feel this way a pass.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting, sis. And you know what it made me think of? It made me think of like, all right, let's take this whole position of it being a syndrome. Like, let's entertain that for one moment. If someone, went to a physician and were diagnosed with diabetes, right? Like, I'm going to go on the assumption, as someone who's never been diagnosed with diabetes, that, a good physician would then start to, encourage the patient to make some other changes so that the condition would no longer exist, right? So they would focus on what's happening so that you will no longer have to take that insulin or take that pill or whatever. You get what I'm saying? Or if
Yeah.
it's hypertension, let's make the other changes. So let's change the real problem so that the condition will go away. And that's what what made me what I thought about when you were just talking just now about imposter syndrome. So like, even if we, keep this whole phrase or term in our vocabulary, and we're like, all right, so Black and brown women are suffering from imposter syndrome. All right, well, now let's make it so that we don't. So how do we do that? What are the risk factors? Like, let's break it down. We're calling it let's break it down. What are the risk factors? What are the contributing factors? What needs to be cut out so that we no longer have this? What needs to be added in? You know what I mean? They might tell you to exercise more. So what needs to be added in? More equitable practices, right? More opportunities, right? So I think that, the term itself is not as problematic as is the erasure of what's actually happening. So the conditions that are actually causing us to experience these feelings. Chantel, what do you think about all of this?
Oh, everything that you said was on point. I think another thing is addressing organization culture, right? Is the organization or business or structure culturally competent to welcome, Black women, women of color? Do the company understand what that entails? What kind of training are these companies having around women of color, right? How are we addressing these issues, right? Are we allowed to have these conversations? We have to remember that these are all new sort of terms and terminology that we are bringing to the forefront, that we are just now acknowledging. So, us being open to having these discussions, I think, as we are here on this platform, is critical, right? So yeah, definitely. We need to be, and maybe it's up to us to lead the forefront and bring these types of issues, make our companies and businesses aware of these terms and the things that we suffer and go through as Black and brown women.
I love that. You know what I really love about that too is I know, we've talked about in a previous episode, like, advocating for our health, right? And so if we're acknowledging that we are dealing with imposter syndrome, then I love that, Chantel, because I know in a lot of spaces, the burden, rests on our shoulders, and it can be a heavy lift. But when it comes to, something such as imposter syndrome, whether we're going to call it that or not, but the symptoms are real, and the impact on our bodies are real, not just like in our mind, but even our physical health is impacted when we have, these, heightened, states of anxiety or nervousness, or, any of that, doubt, depression, all these things that come with imposter syndrome. So just as I'm seeing more of a movement in our community for us to walk into our doctor's offices and be like, you're not just gonna slap me on this pill without, you know what I mean? Then I think we need to do the same thing when it comes to having, like you said, conversations around what's going on in the workplace, because being silent about it, just being, being labeled, and taking that label and like, all right, well, let me go home to deal with this. No, not if I'm showing up here every day. Then we need to stay right here and deal with it. Either that or leave, So you got options, but I'm just saying, I think you raised a good point around us advocating for ourselves in the workplace, which, kind of leads us to the final part of this conversation. I do, think that we definitely need to do all that we can to support each other in terms of a lot of things. I mean, one thing I'm thinking about, I just made a comment. I said, you can, leave, or you can stay and fight, essentially, right? Stay and help make positive change, rather. But when there are opportunities, I think that more of us need to stand up for one another. And also each one, reach one and pull one up. So if you know of organizations that are hiring, that maybe, their culture is moving in a different direction or making different strides, let another sister know. But in the meantime, for those of us who might still be in our workplaces and still, dealing with the things that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, I just wanted to kind of end with some tips for helping to combat imposter syndrome, you know, in the moment? Anything that maybe you've done, or even if you haven't done it and you're like, I think this might, you know, work, I'd like to share. I guess I'll start with thinking back to that instance in that auditorium. One thing that I had to do was overestimate, which I wouldn't even call it an overestimation, basically give myself my props, you know, so it wasn't an overestimation.
Mhm.
At the time I was underestimating myself. And so in the moment, what I had to do was I had to remember who I was and why I was there. And at the end of the day, I was asked to be there because I was qualified to be there, because I had valuable knowledge to share. And so
Say that part again.
why I was qualified to be there, I had valuable knowledge to share. And so at the end of the day, in that moment, I had to remind myself of that. So that was a counter narrative that I had to speak into myself in that moment. So literally pour into myself, because nobody else around me even knew what was happening. This was all going on in my head. I never even said it out loud. But are there any other strategies that maybe you all would like to share to kind of overcome imposter syndrome?
I would say that positive self-talk, right? Like, you've earned the right to be there. You know, you've earned the right to be Dr. Tony Woodland. Like, you didn't go outside and pick it up off the street. Like, you worked for it, right?
This
And
ain't
I
no
think,
honorary degree.
come on now, blood, sweat, and tears. And I
No
think that
shade.
to be proud of whatever profession or position that you in, if you worked hard and you earned the right to be there, be proud of that. Be proud of your accomplishments. Don't shrink back, you know. And I think that's why having more trainings around, you know, self-care and empowerment and the things that women of color go through, and shifting the culture is so important, because it's not that we are the imposters, it's the people that we work with and come in contact with who assume we are the imposters, right? And so, and having communities like this where we as women of color can affirm and reaffirm, you know, and I'm proud to go out like, no, my friends are doctors, honey. You know, my friends is about to be running schools. And, you know, I'm proud to, you know, uplift and encourage and, you know, and be that person to big up my sis. And because I know what it takes to work hard and get to those spaces. So, you know, we're not going to apologize for being you know, smart and intelligent. We've earned the right to be in these spaces. So
That's dope. And real quick, you said the word culture. You know, listen, you know, we keep it raw, real, and relatable on here. So speaking of culture, if you have followed BGSO for a minute, you know that we are based in Baltimore, Maryland, and it is a beautiful day. So you probably heard a few moments ago, those guys out there on those dirt bikes. So, you know, listen, the spirit of keeping it real, man, they are enjoying
part
the
of our
weather.
culture.
It is part of the culture. I was like, I gotta make sure. Listen, we are not going to act like y'all didn't just hear that a few moments ago, right? Popping wheelies and everything. Okay, shout out to the 12 o'clock boys. All right. Nafisa, what about you? Any
I mean,
strategies?
I laughed when she started to talk, because I was actually going to say positive self-talk too. And I think just continuing to like uplift each other is so important. I don't feel like we do that enough, you know, because even when I give like compliments to like other like, you know, Black and brown sisters, are almost like surprised. I'm like, oh sis, I love your shirt, or you look good, sis, I like your hair, you know, I like your boobs, just giving compliments, or you did a great job. I just feel like it doesn't happen enough. It's almost like a surprise when it does. You're like taken aback, like, well, what, you know, what's that about? Or where's that coming from? So I think just not only doing the self-talk for ourselves and reaffirming ourselves, but also to reaffirm each other. I think that's so important, because I think that just helps when you're showing up in your different spaces and everybody doesn't have the confidence, and maybe in that moment you're not confident, but I think the more that you have that positive self-talk, and the more that we're doing that and uplifting each other, it's just helpful when you have those moments that you can snap out of it and remember who you are, like you said, and know that you are qualified to be there. Just like I kind of had to my moment. I'm like, wait a minute, I earned being here. I had to go through a whole series of things. You know, I have a master's degree in it. I went through a whole skills assessment. I went through a panel interview. So I earned my way to be able to apply for and be an assistant principal. And in that moment, one thing she said to me had me questioning myself. So
Right.
I was able to dig myself out quickly because of the self-work that I've done. But, you know, had that happened maybe 10 years ago, I could have been a mess and been like, maybe this isn't for me. Cause, you know, I'm not where I was. Where I am now is not where I was, you know, 10 years ago. So definitely just continue to do self-talk, you know, positive self-talk, not only to yourself, but continue to reaffirm like other Black and brown sisters and lift them up as well.
I love that you said that you said that you were able to pull yourself out of it because of the self-work that you've done. And you know, that's so important that you acknowledge that, Nafisa, because like you said, yes, I know a lot of us are in this space where we're doing a lot of this work, and a lot of us, as you already acknowledged, maybe just aren't there yet. So like on that note, I just wanted to you know, end and just share with our viewers that one thing that's really powerful. I've mentioned this before, but if you don't already have a sister circle, I'm encouraging you to find one and or create one. I can't tell you how much BGSO means to me. The larger group and our BGSO panel sisters, Chantal, Nafisa, Edwina, and I, we are sisters like in real life. In real life. And if you've been around us, you would know, and everyone who has is always like, oh my gosh, the love is real. I encourage you to find a circle or create one. And those can also be created in the workspace. I have co-facilitated affinity groups for people who identify as people of color in the workplace. And I can't tell you how connected and how affirmed and empowered we all felt in that space, and even beyond that space, because you carry that love with you. So I just wanted to share that if your workplace does not already have like a formal affinity group, I encourage you to, you know, start one, and or, you know, start an informal one, and make sure that you all connect with each other, just as Nafisa and Chantal have already pointed out. So, you know, we like to just have brief conversations about things that matter to us and to you all. Thank you all so much for joining us for another great conversation. Thank you, sisters, for this conversation. I really appreciated it. Please make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Again, this is an open invitation to join our Brown Girls Sound Off or BGSO group on Facebook. Find us on there. You'll see like BGSO in the little headphones, right? Also, let us know in the comments, you know, even if it's on YouTube or in the Facebook group, let us know in the comments what you thought about tonight's episode, and maybe ways that you have dealt with imposter syndrome, or whether you think we should just trash the whole term altogether. Let us know. We love to hear your feedback. As always, it's been amazing. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we will see you on the first Thursday of April. All right, everyone. Bye.